Prehistoric humans befriended wolves to survive the freezing winter. Imagine yourself shivering in an icy night tens of thousands of years ago. Wind howls through leafless trunks. Snow blankets the entire forest, and beside a small fire, a prehistoric human stares into the gleaming eyes of a wild wolf. Is it an enemy stalking prey, or the beginning of a friendship that would change the fate of all humankind? A brutal winter, the cold of endless nights. Picture a world more than 20,000 years ago. No electric light, no sturdy houses, and certainly no warm coats to withstand the cold. The only thing separating humans from a frozen death was a small, flickering flame amid an unending blizzard. Winter then was not like winter as we know it today, it was the Ice Age. Thick ice covered the land. Breath turned to white frost inside stone shelters. Prehistoric people faced not only the horrifying cold but also a constant dread. Hunger. Food ran out. Fruits and wild greens vanished beneath thick snow. Migratory herds had already moved far away to seek warmer lands. In the darkness, the wind whistled through mountain passes like the growl of ancient spirits. The primitive man crouched by the fire, its weak light barely illuminating a gaunt face. His eyes were sunken from hunger. Outside, the shadows of predators drifted about, waiting for a chance. If the fire went out, the entire group could become a feast for nocturnal hunters. The cold didn't just numb the body, it eroded the will. Prehistoric people had to ask themselves whether they could even wake up the next day, whether the ice would swallow everything whole. Yet precisely in those moments of deepest despair, the survival instinct burned stronger than ever. Humans did not give up. They tried everything to hold on. Gathering dry wood, spreading animal skins over ice to sleep. More importantly, they began to pay attention to the living creatures around them, including those once considered enemies. In the long night's rare quiet, when the wind briefly eased, a distant howl echoed. The sound reverberated through the wild mountains, making the prehistoric heart clamp tight. It was the call of a wolf. To them, wolves meant danger. But they did not know that this cry was the beginning of a great alliance soon to form, born from hunger and the instinct to survive. When the faint light of morning crept through the rocks, the cold still clung to every strand of fur and every crack in human skin. The prehistoric man struggled up after a broken night of sleep. His breath puffed in white plumes. His cracked hands, trembling from the frost, grasped a bone gnawed nearly clean. It was all that remained from the last hunt. A scrawny deer divided down to the marrow. Hunger was an invisible but terrifying foe. It clenched the stomach, dulled the mind, and weakened the body. In a world where each step could decide life or death, such debilitation was a death sentence. Children in the band cried from hunger while the elders suffered in silence, their eyes emptied of hope. But instead of collapsing, humans learned to observe nature more closely. They noticed faint footprints on the snow, listened for the smallest sounds in the deep woods, and tried new ways to set traps. Sometimes they failed and returned empty-handed. Sometimes a small rabbit or a few fish drawn from beneath the ice became a meal that saved the group. Hunger also made humans bolder. They ventured far beyond safe zones, into the territories of predators. In those risky hunts, not a few lost their lives. But that was the price to prolong existence. Amid countless dangers, one thing held them steady: solidarity. They never ate alone. They always shared what little they had, because they understood only unity could withstand the winter. The fire was kept alive not just with wood, but with trust. And then a truth grew clear. Humans could not defeat nature through force alone. They needed something more, an ally, another strength to share the burden of survival. They didn't yet know where that ally would come from, but the howls echoing through the night seemed to whisper a hint. As dusk fell, the sun sank behind ice-covered ranges, leaving a sky red as blood. The cold rose at once, harsher than in the morning. Prehistoric people quietly gathered remaining bits of wood, stoking a weak flame inside the cave. That flame did more than warm them. It was the last boundary between life and death. Children pressed into their mothers, curling under thin hides. The men gripped stone spears, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond. They knew that tonight, Lurking with the cold were pairs of glowing eyes waiting in the forest. A pack's howl pierced the silence, long and tearing. It was a sound that tightened hearts, both threatening and mysterious. Glinting eyes moved in the dark, curving in a crescent around the firelight. Humans understood they were not alone. A clash could erupt at any moment. In fear, a thought flashed. Were wolves truly enemies that could never be avoided? They were hungry too, shivering in the cold, forced to hunt to live. Like humans, they were creatures driven into a corner by a merciless winter. A strong gust blew. The flame flickered on the verge of dying. The group panicked, shielding the fire with their bodies. In that instant, a lone wolf slipped from the darkness, edging closer. It did not snarl or charge, only stood, its shining eyes fixed on the humans. Tense silence blanketed the air. For the first time, the two species saw each other not only with fear, but with something deeper, curiosity. The primitive man reflexively tossed a bone with a bit of meat toward the wolf. The wolf hesitated, then darted forward, snatched it, and retreated into the dark. Everyone held their breath, unsure whether they had done right or invited disaster. They did not know that this small moment was the first seed of a relationship that would change human history. A face-to-face with the wolf in the dark. That night, after the wolf vanished with the bone, the band sank into a taut silence. Eyes turned toward the man who had thrown away precious food. Some shook their heads, calling it reckless. Feeding a predator could embolden it. But in the eyes of the one who did it glimmered something hard to name, a fragile hope. At dawn the next day, the familiar howl returned. The band froze. Had the wolf come back? This time they saw it more clearly. A gaunt gray wolf, fur matted with icy snow, stood not far from the cave, not attacking, just watching. Each of its movements raised stone spears, yet it never lunged. The man tried again. He took a leftover bone from the night before and tossed it to the wolf. It hesitated, stepped back, then approached, grabbed it, and immediately left. No growling, no assault, only a simple exchange. Food for safe distance. So it went for many days. Each night the wolf inched closer. It no longer avoided human gaze, but began to watch them closely, as if weighing something. The people grew less frightened, though still extremely cautious. They noticed the wolf did not lead a pack. It was alone, perhaps abandoned or driven out. To a starving human, sharing food with another creature could seem madness. But in a world where life and death were a breath apart, instinct whispered that sometimes, to survive, humans must try the unusual. That small act opened an unexpected door. One night, while the wind howled and beasts prowled near the camp, the gray wolf did not leave after taking the bone. It lingered, sitting only a few steps from the fire, eyes reflecting the wavering flames. In that moment, humans and wolf gazed together into the fire, the symbol of life, of warmth, and of the fragile belief that the cold would not devour everything. It was only a meeting, but it was the beginning of a strange bond. Steps drawing closer. In the following days, the gray wolf's presence became familiar to the band. At first, they remained on edge. They could not know whether the animal feigned calm only to attack one night. Yet strangely, it never showed aggression. Instead of growling or charging, it kept a distance, as if it too was deciding whether humans could be trusted. The children whispered about the spirit wolf guarding the fire. Sometimes, when a distant howl floated on the wind, they even felt safer, knowing the wolf was near, seemingly watching the dark. The man who had thrown the first bone kept feeding it. Whenever the band secured a bit of game, he saved bones or scraps to toss toward the wolf. At first, it snatched them and left. Gradually, it stopped retreating, sitting a while and eating in plain sight. The gap shrank bit by bit, from 10 paces to 7, then 5. Each step closer was a trial of nerves. Spears remained ready, but over time, hands gripped them less tightly. Both sides learned to endure each other's presence. One evening, snow fell so thick it blurred all sight. The wolf suddenly growled toward the trees. The band jolted, instinctively tightening their grip on weapons. At that very moment, a giant bear's roar thundered from the dark. Without the wolf's warning, they would not have reacted in time. People exchanged looks, astonished and confused. Had the wolf warned them? Was it not merely taking food, but also acting as eyes and ears in a perilous night? When the bear left and danger passed, no one threw the bone far. The man set it right before the fire. The wolf stepped forward and, for the first time, ate within the flicker of light in front of the whole band. The distance was small, but it was a huge advance in forging trust. Trust in the fire. That winter night was so cold the fire crackled like it was gasping. The band huddled together, eyes weary yet alert. Darkness seemed to swallow the forest. And then, as usual, light footsteps. The gray wolf returned. It no longer stood far off. This time it came to the very edge of the fire's glow. Its gray fur bristled with frost. Golden eyes glimmered, not with threat, but like a worn traveler seeking warmth. The band waited in silence. No one moved. No one dared breathe hard. The familiar man offered a bone, but instead of throwing it, he placed it beside the fire. The wolf hesitated a long moment, then stepped in. Firelight reflected in its eyes made the moment surreal. Humans and wolf, once sworn enemies, now sat within the same circle of light. Everyone held their breath, but the wolf merely lowered its head, seized the bone, and, rather than fleeing, lay down a short distance from the fire to gnaw. The sound of bone cracking mixed with the wind's whistle outside. In that moment something odd happened. Fear lessened, replaced by another feeling. His presence made the darkness beyond less terrifying. Children stopped crying. Adults exchanged glances, mingled astonishment and hope. All night the wolf did not leave. It lay there, occasionally lifting its head to scan the dark, ears pricking at each noise, as if it too was standing guard. The band gradually relaxed. Some even slept more soundly than usual, knowing another pair of eyes watched the night. At first light, the wolf rose, shook snow from its coat, and slipped away. But this time no one saw it as a predator anymore. They watched it go, a thought stirring. Perhaps in this brutal struggle for survival, they had found an ally. That was the first night humans and wolf shared the same fire, and the night that opened the door to a relationship that would forever alter human history. An alliance for survival, steps taken together. After that strange night, the entire band began to look at the gray wolf differently. No longer merely a predator lurking in the dark, it became part of the circle of light around the fire. Whenever snow fell thick and wind screamed through the valley, they wondered if it would return. Most nights, the answer was yes. It no longer came only to receive a bone or scrap. It began to follow human footprints on short daytime hunts. At first, it kept its distance, observing. Then, as if driven by the hunter's instinct, it drew closer, matching the group's pace and silence. One morning, as the band stalked a snow hare, the gray wolf suddenly sprang ahead, driving the prey toward crude traps the humans had set. The hare was caught. The group exhaled in relief. At first they thought it coincidence, but it happened again. The wolf did not steal the catch or turn away. It seemed to be contributing to the hunt. For humans, this was unprecedented. A wild creature, once a threat, becoming an unexpected companion. The man who had thrown the first bone began to think further. If one wolf could help, perhaps it could become a true ally. At night, with the fire glowing in the cave, the wolf no longer sat far away. It curled near the entrance, ears pricked, alert to every sound. To humans, it was like having a new night watchman. People slept easier, no longer jolting at each strange noise in the forest. Children whispered a simple name in the most ancient language, a sign of familiarity. Gray friend. In that moment, the boundary between human and wolf blurred as never before. No one could be sure where this relationship would go, but one thing was clear. In that frozen winter, humans were no longer entirely alone. They had found a new strength, eyes that pierced the darkness, a nose keen to the scent of danger, and a spirit as resilient as their own. The alliance between human and wolf had begun, slowly but surely, hunting in the cold. Hunger still clung to the band, but now they had an unusual companion. The gray wolf didn't just watch from afar. It took part in short hunts around the icy valley. With its keen nose, it detected signs the human eye could not, trails hidden beneath snow, faint breaths of prey drifting on the wind. Once, when the hunters were near despair, the wolf suddenly stopped, growled softly, then bolted in one direction. At first they thought it had abandoned them, but minutes later chaos burst from the brush. A skinny deer, panicked, ran straight toward stone traps already set. The band stiffened, then tightened their spears. In an instant they had their largest meal in weeks. No one spoke, but their eyes acknowledged it. The wolf was no longer merely a scavenger. It had become part of the hunt. That night the band ate their fill. Laughter echoed in the cave, a sound long absent in the killing cold. A portion of meat was placed before the fire. The gray wolf approached, not grabbing or fighting, but waiting until the man signaled. It ate slowly, as if understanding it had been invited to the feast. Gradually, both sides learned each other's signals. Humans learned the meaning of the wolf's low growl when a stranger neared or the scent of a predator drifted by. The wolf, in turn, learned when to advance and when to stop, guided by human gestures and eyes. In a world without complex language, these signs became a bond. Each step together across the white snow strengthened trust. Children grew used to the gray shape lingering outside the cave. They no longer feared the howl. They even felt safer. To them, the wolf was no longer an outsider. It had become part of us. This strange alliance not only helped the band survive a harsher winter, it gave them something more precious than food: the sense that nature was not entirely against them. In a hostile world, they finally found a creature that stood on their side. Seeds for the future. Winter had not ended, but the band was different now. They no longer huddled silently by the fire waiting for death. They stepped out with new confidence. On hunts, they were no longer alone. The gray shadow led ahead, sniffing out prey, warning of danger, sometimes lunging to drive game toward human traps. At night, when wind moaned and fangs clattered in the deep forest, the band was less afraid. The gray wolf lay at the cave entrance, ears erect, eyes glowing through the darkness, standing guard like a silent warrior. One growl and everyone knew something approached. Over time, trust became habit. Humans shared food. The wolf shared protection. Together they formed a language without words. Glances, gestures, sounds blending into mutual understanding. One morning, snow began to melt lightly on the mountainside, signaling spring. The band stood outside the cave, looking across the plain. They knew this season they had survived not only by their own strength, but thanks to a wild creature once seen as an enemy. Children toddled about the entrance, calling it by the simple name, Gray Friend. The adults looked at one another and nodded slowly, acknowledging that this creature had become part of them. No longer just a wolf, but our wolf. What they did not foresee was that this small choice, sharing a bone on a night of despair, had planted the seed of a relationship that would last tens of thousands of years. From then on, wolves drew closer. Humans learned how to nurture them, and from the harsh winter, the first dogs were born. Today, when a dog curls at our feet, when it guards the door each night or bounds joyfully across a yard, few remember that this bond began in a distant winter when a starving human tossed a bone into the darkness, and a lone wolf decided not to leave. That small moment changed human history forever. The journey of prehistoric humans and the gray wolf is not merely a tale of surviving a bitter winter. It is proof of humanity's wondrous capacity to connect, to share, and to see opportunity even in seemingly insurmountable danger. From a wary glance and a bone thrown in desperation, a relationship was formed. One that not only helped a band survive harsh months but opened a future where humans and wild animals could coexist and support each other. It was the beginning of a bond that would last tens of thousands of years, turning the wild wolf into the dog, the most loyal companion of humankind. Today, when we look into a dog's eyes, hear it bark in warning before our homes, or feel its warmth curled beside us, remember, it all began in a snow-covered night long ago, when humans and wolves chose trust over fear, friendship over confrontation. That story invites a question for our modern world. Do we still have the courage and compassion to open our arms to what is different, as our ancestors did with wolves? Who knows, perhaps a small decision today could bring great changes tomorrow. If this story touches your heart, leave your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe that, in such circumstances, humans would dare to place their trust in a wild wolf? Don't forget to subscribe to explore more extraordinary tales of prehistoric people, evolution, and the moments that shaped humanity. And if you want to continue the journey, turn on notifications so each new episode reaches you as soon as it's released. Because, just as the fire once united humans and wolves through the long, cold night, knowledge and stories are the flames that connect us today.